What is going on, y'all? Psych Perspectives, Geo Fucks here. In this video, inspired by X, formerly known as Twitter. Again, it's always the same conversations, but one of the conversations was discussing how one person on X made a post. They appear to be a cis gay man. Okay, a cis gay black queer man. And they were discussing on their X post how a lot of gay men in the black gay queer and just gay queer community at whole kind of need to prepare for being single into their old age. As in, people are getting older and becoming, middle age to elders. In their opinion, a lot of gay queer men need to get used to being single and potentially leaving this earth realm, dying single and alone. And they also mentioned in their X post that while there are people that are in the gay queer community, in the gay black queer LGBTQ plus community that are in healthy, loving relationships, that doesn't really seem to be the norm. And they were discussing how, they're all for romantic, healthy relationships, and at the same time, they're also being realistic. And I was just like, you know what? This is the ongoing discussion that we're always talking about when it comes to love, sex, healthy romantic partnerships and relationships within the black, gay, queer, LGBTQ plus community, and arguably in the gay, queer, LGBTQ plus community at whole, is the ongoing discussion of relationships. And, are we going to die alone? Are we going to forever be single and alone? I reposted their X post and put my little 2 cents on it. And I basically was like, here's the thing. I've been saying this in my videos. This is from my perspective, my opinion. And then also looking at my lived experiences. I'm not saying that I'm 100% correct or right. I'm not saying that I can't be wrong or uninformed. I'm just stating my perspective. Please feel free to educate and enlighten me and share your resources, information, your experiences, your perspective. This is from my perspective. In my opinion, I stated, to me, our culture within the gay queer community doesn't really help facilitate healthy romantic relationships, let alone like romance, love. Our culture in of itself is like a mirror back into the homophobia in a way, because it's like everything seems to be, and this is from my perspective, my opinion, seems to be circled around sex, physical looks, physical attraction, sexual attraction, money, success, materialistic financial success, and vacations and what we own and how much money we have and who's the baddest bitch and being the mean girl, the mean boy, the mean person, even though you're like 30 plus, still having this stuck up from the Mean Girls movie attitude. And people are 30, 40, 50, 60 years old still with that personality. And I also look at how toxic masculinity plays a role, because regardless of us being gay, bisexual, pansexual, asexual, a lot of men, unfortunately, and in particular your cis males, adhere to a lot of toxic masculinity. And keep in mind, intersex men, trans men, guess what? We also adhere to a lot of toxic masculinity, okay? And what I mean by that is, if you're going to only think about yourself 24/7, 365, arguably, you don't need to be in a relationship. And that arguably is one of the many reasons why, in my opinion, relationships don't work in the gay queer community. You can't really be in a relationship if you're going to be self-centered and only think about yourself. That is not how relationships work. And when you look at how a lot of cis males, and then not just cis males, but masculine people, intersex men, trans men, non-binary, etc. You look at how, in a traditional sense, how cis males are socialized. They're socialized to be self-centered, self-absorbed. They're not socialized to communicate their feelings. They're not told that it's okay to be emotional, to have emotions. The only emotions you're allowed to have from a toxic masculinity, patriarchal lens, white supremacist lens, misogynistic lens, you're supposed to be angry and aggressive, violent, domineering and controlling. So it's like, I'm sorry, but people typically don't really, those types of personalities and ideologies don't really work well for relationships. Like, go figure. You know, you actually have to care about somebody else's needs and wants. You can't just be focused on yourself. And when you look at how we're socialized, and granted, everybody isn't horrible or bad, or, you know, everybody isn't adhering to toxic masculinity, to misogyny, to homophobia, to transphobia, to sexism, to, you know, and at the same time, we're all products of this environment. And, you know, unless you are actively, in my opinion, inexperienced, unless we are, I'm including myself, unless we are actively working to unlearning toxic behaviors, really working on our trauma, really checking our bullshit, then a lot of us end up perpetuating and feeding into the negative ideologies and beliefs. So one of the aspects to, are we going to always be lonely, or are we ever going to forever be single, is the simple fact that, hey, if we're going to be selfish, we are not the types that should be in relationships. That does not pan out. And I also want to leave off saying this. We also didn't have a we didn't have a blueprint. We didn't have guidelines to really see how gay queer men have relationships, healthy relationships, how they show up for each other, how they show up for themselves, how they show up in community. We didn't really have that because, again, thanks to homophobia, and serophobia and just hatred and bigotry, you had an entire generation of LGBTQ plus people that were literally killed, were murdered off. And you're probably wondering, what do you mean? The HIV AIDS epidemic, and then when you look in the 80s, it might as well have been a pandemic, and it's still an epidemic to this very day. So many gay queer men died. Okay, so many gay queer LGBTQ plus people died because of the homophobia, because of the transphobia, the biphobia, the serophobia, the lack of healthcare, the lack of care about people. So people who would have been showing us the ropes, or who would have been representing our culture, and who would have been pushing, you know, for our equality, our representation, our freedoms and rights, many of them were killed. They died in the HIV AIDS epidemic, ongoing epidemic. And a lot of people still end up being DL. Let's just be honest. A lot of folks are queer, but because of the hatred and the bigotry and the discrimination and just the persecution that we face, people still stay in the closet. You have people who really, you know, so it's like, again, we didn't have a lot of representation to see gay queer men loving each other, caring for each other, and having any real long-lasting, committed, monogamous, or just committed relationships, because you could have a committed relationship without being monogamous. I also wanted to point out another person on X that I admire a lot. Shout out Drew. Shout out Drew on X. Also mentioned that we don't all aspire to be in relationships. A lot of us feel pressured to be in relationships because that's what we're literally taught that we're supposed to do, which arguably that is very cis heteronormative. That is very cisgendered, heterosexual normative ideology of thinking that, okay, I'm going to exist, I'm going to fall in love with somebody, I'm going to get married, and I'm going to have kids. That is not even, a lot of cis het people don't want that. So everybody doesn't necessarily want that. And at the same time, I'm going to keep saying there's nothing wrong with people wanting to have committed, healthy relationships, get married. There's nothing wrong with people wanting to be monogamous. I'm just saying, regardless, a lot of this, we didn't have a blueprint. And we weren't allowed to date when the ideal, or the stereotypical age that we should have been dating. And what I mean by that is a lot of LGBTQ plus gay queer men, black gay queer men, LGBTQ plus people in general, we were not out the closet when we were young, when we were preteens and teenagers. So many of us didn't date. So I'm not saying that that's the only reason why, but it does play a role. We didn't get to have that coming of age, having a crush, liking your crush, approaching people, dating. We weren't allowed to. We were either in the closet, on the down low, forced to, suppress how we felt, so a lot of us missed out on that, where a lot of your cis het friends literally were allowed to date and be in whole ass relationships when they were preteens and teenagers. Where a lot of LGBTQ plus people, gay queer people, that was later down the road. Like, I'm talking people were in their late teens and 20s and 30s and 40s before they even really started living their truths to even start doing that. So one of the other reasons why it seems like a lot of us are single and alone, or that seems to be the norm, is like, again, we are novice beginners to actually, some of us, arguably a lot of us, in my opinion and in my lived experience, a lot of us are novice beginners to relationships, to sex, to being in our authentic bodies and selves. Like, it's literally like, it's brand new for a lot of us. So it's like, again, it's a lot of trial and error also. But that's just one of the many reasons I think a lot of us deal with that. Potentially always being single, never having relationships, or becoming elderly and being alone and potentially dying alone and single. I'm going to have more installments on this because this is an ongoing topic. Like I said, everybody keeps bringing it up. So, hey, I'm going to continue to talk about it. And again, check out Say So TV's channel. Check out Leah Baddie's channel. Oh my gosh. I'm going to literally, like, dead ass, I am going to literally just start having a YouTuber's channel that I watch in my description box save as a default, so I could just list all the people that I watch. And then I'm going to do better at just referencing their YouTube channels and videos in the videos that I make that I mention them. Because, it's so many people talking about this, and it's so much different perspectives and ways of thought and opinions on this. So, yeah, check them out so you can get more of a well-rounded view on this. Anyways, let me get in here. Shout out Unreal World, Don, Medicinal, you know me.